Today I'm going to find out why someone becomes a historical reenactor and what it involves. I'm speaking to Dan Shadrake, co-author with Susanna Shadrake of Barbarian Warriors. Dan, you're a member of Britannia, one of the largest and oldest single reenactment groups in the country. Can you tell me what attracted you to reenacting, and had you been involved in reenactment before joining Britannia?
I think what attracted me to reenacting was history. Generally, I've always kind of grown up with it. When we were kids, very often we'd go away on holiday and we'd spend time around places like Dover Castle and Deal and places like that, Stonehenge, and our parents would always say, try and imagine what it was like for people that lived here at the time. Try and imagine what it was like for people that built these places and had to live in them. And I guess something must have stuck. So when I reached my teens, the next progression was to join a reenactment society. I'm never going to have a time machine. I would love a time machine. I'm never going to have one. So I just have to sort of do the next best thing to try and live an experience. I think the problem is obviously once you don the costume and once you're on an historical site, everything you do is just an interpretation, because we're never going to really know unless we can travel back, which we can't.
Can you tell me more about what Britannia do and how they started?
I started Britannia in 1990, and because I was always interested at that stage, I was interested in what was going on at the end of the Roman period. I always didn't feel it was very satisfying in books in schools when I was growing up. The books in schools kind of said, and then the Romans left Britain, and then this is like 200 or 300 year period, and then it goes straight to the Viking invasions. And I just thought there's something else going on there. People just didn't disappear. And I was always interested in the late Roman period and the time that followed. And obviously within that is tucked very nicely fantastic legends about Vortigern and Arthur and people like that. And I just thought, you know what, I want to try and recreate that time. I want to try and bring that to the public. I want to try and put it out on the field, trying to piece together those lost centuries. And really it's a real challenge, and been absolutely fantastic fun. But what's happened to Britannia over the years is it's kind of had to adapt and change. We found ourselves being very film friendly, and we found ourselves on film sets. We worked on Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, First Night, and we also very proud to have worked on Ridley Scott's Gladiator. And we found ourselves on that set, and within a few months of working on that film, word had got round and we had clients wanting to book us as gladiators. And initially we said, no, we're purely late Roman, and then we realised that actually the public want to see gladiators. So we started putting on gladiator shows in some very, very nice venues, including the Guildhall Yard in London, and thousands of people came along to see. We were really swept away by the success of it, and so we decided to stage gladiatorial shows, really grew from there. And then in recent years we've been approached by clients like English Heritage to stage other periods, and we currently also do the 13th century King John's period, because that's a very interesting period for us as well. And we also now do the First World War. So yeah, we've had to be versatile over the years. I think if there's a time period that really interests us, we'll research and do our best to interpret it.
And how do you go about reconstructing the weapons and costumes of the period? I noticed you've got some shields that you've made. Yeah. And is that a Roman oven behind?
Yeah, that's complete self-indulgence, a Roman oven. I had several thousand tiles left over from building a shed, and I thought I don't want to take them to the tip. So I thought I'd build myself a Roman-style oven. I have to confess it's not completely accurate. I've used modern fire bricks inside it. It's really, I wanted to cook outdoors and I wanted to barbecue outdoors, and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to build myself a Roman oven. So I did, and a Roman style oven, I hasten to add. But as for going about reconstructing the equipment, well, that's a difficult one. Very often the information you have is very, very sketchy. Archaeology is always the best, but sometimes if you don't have the archaeology, you have to fall back on paintings, you have to fall back on images and coins. You've got to fall back on a whole variety of sources.
What type of sources? Old reliefs and...
Yeah, I mean the sources we tend to use are many and varied. Sometimes you have to go on the accounts at the time, and believe it or not, there are some quite interesting ones. For instance, in the later Roman period, you have Vegetius, and Vegetius is a fantastic character. He's moaning about how inadequate the army is of his time, and what he does in doing so is he compares the training techniques, he compares some of the equipment to the early Roman army, and you get this fantastic commentary which you can actually piece together some information from. But also you have the archaeology, which is a really, really good source, but sometimes the archaeology can be a little bit odds with what's written, and sometimes it can be at odds with what is actually shown in artwork. For instance, you have this fantastic column in Rome, Trajan's column in Rome, which shows the early Roman army on campaign, and it's fantastic. But when you actually look at the archaeology of Roman armour compared to the depictions of Roman armour on the column, there are marked differences. So you can't always go. I'm afraid you can't always rely totally on artistic interpretation. There are times when you have no other source, and sometimes you have to cast your net wide. Ideally, I would love to recreate things just in Britain, just at a certain time, but very often the information is so scarce, you have to cast your net wide. You've got to kind of borrow from sources from in France and Germany and places like that to try and piece an outfit together, and that's the real challenge, but it's also quite fun to do.
Thank you. You mentioned that Britannia appeared in Ridley Scott's Gladiator, and that led to Britannia forming Gladiators Britanniae.
Right, yeah.
How dangerous is it going hammer and tongs against each other? And in any group dynamic, people have fallings out. In any of the fights between the gladiators, is there any one being a bit overzealous in their pursuit?
I think sometimes people get very excited. I mean, the first thing is to stress is there are fallings out. Of course, it's the same as any hobby, any social group. There are going to be fallings out. People don't always get on. But I kind of think it's like a village of people, and there's going to be gossip. There's going to be people that have little fallings out. But generally, when the chips are down, everybody pulls together and helps each other out. And I'm really, really lucky because they're such a good group. But the thing is, obviously, as for it turning nasty, well, no, there's this kind of watchword that a lot of reenactors use, this phrase rather, and that is never in anger. And if you ever feel yourself getting very, very angry, the best thing you do is just leave the field. Because if you go over the line and actually hurt somebody, and and you actually want to hurt somebody, then obviously you shouldn't be doing historical reenactment. And if anybody's like that, obviously they shouldn't. I mean, we kind of are very careful about who we recruit, and that's how we kind of stop things like that from happening. But of course, sometimes people go to wallop, and even if you're working in the shed, you go to wallop, you're going to feel pretty angry to watch things. There are risks. It's a contact sort of, not a contact sport as such, but when you're rehearsing things like this, there are tiny risks. There are slip-ups, there are risks, and there are mistakes, and sometimes it involves a trip to A&E. There have been some quite horrific accidents in historical reenactment over the years. We've had a couple of nasty sort of bumps and prangs in the group, which haven't been great. And when that kind of thing happens, you kind of think to yourself, do I want to keep doing this? And But I think generally people are so careful about not hurting each other. And I think most people with all the pieces in place in their head are not want to go out. You don't want to go out to actually hurt somebody. You want to go out to entertain. You want to go out to sort of perform, and you want to go out to interest people. I think the thing is, it's nice to have spot on, accurate living or good interpretation of living history. It's lovely to have that, but I think the good old British public want to see a bit of a punch up at the end of the day. And if it's carefully rehearsed, then the kids go home excited and they ask them can we go back to that site next year? And then the mother and father then phone that particular client and say, is that on next year? And then when that happens, you've done a good job. And then if the kids start reading about it, obviously there's only so much you can do. You can't preach to people, you can't give people a history lesson totally and utterly throughout the day. But if you can generate interest in somebody, then you've done a good job. We're at Richborough Roman Fort. This must have been about 10 years ago. We were there, and a girl came up to us, and because we've been going now for almost 30 years. And a girl came up to us, and she said that she came up. She said, "I want to thank you lot." I said, "Why is that?" She said, "I've got my degree in history, got a first." I said, "Really?" She said. And it started 10 years before when I saw you lot at a show. And I was so hooked on history since that day. And I thought, well, even if I do nothing else, I'm really chuffed about that. I'm really, really pleased that I've actually made a tiny, tiny difference in someone's life. If someone is that interested in history that they've actually followed it to get a degree, then bingo, it's good.
That's a fantastic story, Dan. How would someone join Britannia or another reenactment society?
Well, this is the thing I always say to people that are interested in joining. It involves getting up from your keyboard and coming outside in the fresh air. I think, and the reason I say that, it sounds really scathing of me to say that. The reason I have to say that is we get a lot of people who are really, really, really interested. And I go through emotions of, introducing to the group and stuff, but we speak to people online. But it does involve getting outside and coming along. And also, the most important item of kit you can ever own is a sense of humour. Forget all the other stuff, you've got a sense of humour and everything else will fall into place. And the reason you need that is sometimes you are standing there in equipment and clothing that's about 1,000 or 2,000 years out of fashion. So yeah, you're going to get laughed at occasionally. It does happen, and you just have to accept it. You've got to have a sense of humour, and you've got to kind of roll with it. And also sometimes the conditions are not great. And the reason I say leaving your keyboard is there's a lot of people that talk about reenactment, but they talk about it from the safety of their keyboard. And this involves actually getting out, coming along, pitching tents in all weathers, and sometimes when the rain is horizontal and it's freezing and there's no public there watching you because it's a really vile day, because you can't control the weather. Sometimes you sit there and you think, what am I doing this for? This is ridiculous. But on a good day, when the sun's shining and there's thousands of people cheering and clapping and the client is doing this, and you think, actually, this is what I do. It's been a good day. And occasionally you end up on a film set, and that's just spectacular. And what I love about film sets, it's not the A-list celebrities, it's not the costumes, it's not the spectacle, it's not the pageant, it's the catering. I love film set. I love it, because it's so good now. Film set. So for me, that's spectacular. I've been on some really, really fantastic. I've worked on Robin Hood, Gladiator. I've worked on Centurion. Horrible Histories. I did 7 years on Horrible Histories, and I was really, really pleased and proud to be on it. It's a fantastic program to be in. But in all cases, I always look for where the catering van is, because that's my favourite aspect of film work. I absolutely love it.
Great news. Outside of Britannia, what else do you do? Is it involved in the history field?
Yeah, it is. I worked as a designer for many, many years, and then I realised it could be far more creative and far more funnier working with kids. And also, kids are the sternest critics. You know instantly if you're doing something right or wrong. And I now work for a company called Portals to the Past, and we visit schools and we interpret a whole variety of time periods. We take workshops into schools where children can get involved in activities, and this is kind of from the Stone Age right the way up to World War II, and it's tremendous fun. And if you can generate interest amongst the kids in history, then again you've done a good job.
Thank you very much, Dan.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.